Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something fascinating and maybe a bit mind-bending for the ancient world. What did the Greeks think about robots, or more precisely, autonomous machines? Picture this: the Athenian sun setting over the Parthenon, the scent of olive trees in the air, and the sound of metal clicking in the workshop of a brilliant inventor. Now, you probably won't survive this if you start imagining robots straight out of a sci-fi film, all flashing lights and whirring motors. But hang in there, because ancient Greece had their own version of robots, just without the buzzing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine a time long before computers, before the hum of AI in our daily lives, but still a time where the human mind and creativity were pushing the boundaries of what seemed possible. The Greeks, known for their philosophy, art, and engineering, didn't exactly have robots as we think of them today, but the idea of machines capable of doing tasks autonomously was a recurring theme in their myths and inventions. The concept of machines that could act without human intervention. Well, that was already planted in the fertile grounds of Greek thought, even if they weren't quite yet practical. Still, it was one of those ideas that felt like it could leap off the pages of philosophy and into reality. The Greeks, always keen on blending mythology with their engineering genius, envisioned what they called automatons machines that moved on their own, seemingly powered by some kind of divine or mechanical force. And this is where things get interesting. They didn't see robots the way we do now, as machines made for tasks. No, to the Greeks, these were creations that blurred the line between man-made and divine. You might already be thinking about the gods and their magical abilities. After all, Greek mythology is full of stories about deities who could create incredible wonders, like Hephaestus, the god of blacksmithing, who crafted automatons. Hephaestus didn't just make weapons. He created self-operating creations that could serve the gods and perform specific tasks. From the myth of Talos, the giant mechanical man who guarded the island of Crete, to the self-moving golden statues of Hephaestus's workshop, the Greeks imagined a world where machines could be infused with the power to move and act on their own, like living creatures. Now, don't get too carried away. These were gods and magic at work. But this mythic foundation reveals a lot about the Greek approach to machines. They saw the potential of automatons, but in a context where the machines were imbued with some kind of divine purpose, often serving the gods themselves, or fulfilling higher tasks that transcended mere labor. In fact, one of the most fascinating things about Greek thought on automatons is how they combined the mechanical with the divine. Their mythologies didn't necessarily see machines as gold, though. lifeless objects. No, these machines often had a sense of life to them. Talos, for example, was made of bronze and used his strength to protect the island from invaders. He had a form of life, driven by the gods, powered by a mysterious force. And that's where the line between machine and life starts to get a little blurry. The Greeks weren't just dreaming about making toys that walked around. They were theorizing about machines that could think and act. This line of thinking would have far-reaching consequences, even though the actual technology didn't exist. It was a profound idea, machines that could be autonomous, doing their work without human interference, and serving a higher purpose, or even achieving their own goals. But the Greeks weren't just visionaries. When it came to myths and gods, some of their thinkers, such as Archimedes, took these ideas and began applying them to practical inventions. Archimedes created complex machines that helped in defense, like catapults and cranes. But he also dabbled in automating certain processes. His inventions helped move the thinking about machines from the divine realm to the practical realm. Did he think about the potential of machines operating on their own in a way we might recognize today? It's unclear, but his creations paved the way for more serious contemplation of automation and mechanics. It's in the stories and the inventions that we start to see the early inklings of the thoughts that would later form the foundation of robotics, AI, and automation as we know them now. But the Greeks, of course, didn't have computers, sensors, or the scientific knowledge we have today. They had myths, legends, and creative minds that sparked the idea of creating machines that could mimic life. Did they foresee machines that could operate completely independently, without human control, like our modern robots? The answer isn't so clear. They saw the possibility, but they didn't have the technology to build it. So what were the Greeks actually thinking? When they imagined these automatons, they were thinking about the future, even if they couldn't fully grasp the way technology would evolve. They weren't just imagining simple machines. They were imagining machines that could think, feel, and act. And this thought process, this blending of human innovation and divine power, would influence the way humanity continues to think about automation, robots, and the boundaries between man and machine. As we move through the next sections of this journey tonight, we'll explore more about these Greek creations, the impact they had on later thinkers, and the fascinating blend of myth and mechanics that still captivates the human imagination. But as you settle into the night and prepare for the road ahead, keep one thing in mind. The Greeks weren't just daydreaming about robots. They were laying the groundwork for the conversations we're still having today. Let's take a closer look at one of the most famous Greek figures who embodied the bridge between divine creativity and mechanical innovation. Hephaestus, the god of fire, metalworking, and craftsmanship. You probably know him as the blacksmith of the gods, the one who forged Zeus's thunderbolts and crafted armor for heroes like Achilles. But there's another aspect to Hephaestus that's particularly relevant to our discussion tonight. Hephaestus wasn't just about making weapons. He created automatons, mechanical beings that moved on their own, as if alive. Imagine this, in Hephaestus's divine workshop. He wasn't just hammering away at swords and shields. No, he was fashioning mechanical beings, golems of bronze and gold that served both the gods and the mortals. It's like he was the first engineer to dream up the concept of robots, long before such a thing was even remotely possible. These automatons were made to walk, talk, and do things independently, moving like living creatures, with the goal of performing specific tasks, but all driven by the god's mechanical genius. One of Hephaestus's most well-known creations was Talos, a giant bronze man who was tasked with guarding the island of Crete. He was programmed to patrol the shores and keep unwanted visitors out. Talos was no ordinary statue. This bronze giant was a machine imbued with lifelike qualities. He was created to protect the island, walking the beaches and throwing stones at any ships that dared to approach. And get this, Talos's power source was a single vein of molten metal running through his body. This molten metal kept him moving, kept his gears turning, and made him a living machine of defense. Even though Talos was a work of fiction, he sparked an idea that has echoed throughout history. Machines that are capable of independent action, operating without human intervention. Now, imagine how the ancient Greeks, who had no concept of electricity, computers, or modern machinery, might have viewed such an invention. They were essentially imagining a world where machines could function autonomously, doing the work humans would do without ever getting tired. To us, that sounds like the stuff of sci-fi, but to the Greeks, it was a natural extension of their ideas about the gods, nature, and innovation. They didn't have the tools to make such a thing real, but they dreamed of it, blending their mythology with the possibilities of mechanical creation. Historians still argue whether the Greeks saw these stories as purely mythical, or whether they might have believed there was a more practical application hidden beneath the surface. Could they have foreseen a time when mechanical creations would indeed function on their own? It's hard to say, but their fascination with automatons suggests that they saw the potential in machines that could move, operate, and think, even if it was in the realm of the gods and fantasy. The seeds of the idea had been planted long before the technological advancements that would bring us robots in the modern world. Hephaestus wasn't just a craftsman of simple tools. He was a visionary who, through his creations, sparked a philosophical question that still resonates with us today. What happens when machines take on lifelike qualities? And can they ever be more than just tools? The ancient Greeks were fascinated by the idea of making machines that could behave like living beings, but they also wrestled with the ethical and metaphysical implications of these creations. Was it possible for a machine to have a kind of life force, even if that force wasn't human? The mythological tales of Hephaestus and his creations raise profound questions about automation and life. They hint at the potential consequences of machines that operate beyond their creator's control. Could these machines have desires or motives of their own? Could they act independently as humans do? And if so, what happens when the lines between the creator and the created blur? While Hephaestus's creations were mythic, they reflect a profound curiosity about the nature of life, autonomy, and invention. They raise questions about the relationship between man, machine, and the divine. These themes would continue to be explored in the centuries to come, as thinkers in different parts of the world sought to bring ideas about autonomous machines from myth into reality. So, as you imagine Talos and the other automated beings in Hephaestus's workshop, remember that the Greeks were already grappling with questions about the boundaries of creation, agency, and purpose, questions that would become central to modern discussions about robotics, artificial intelligence, and the future of technology. For all their advancements, they too were trying to understand the power of creation and whether a machine could ever escape the control of its creator. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. That's great for mythology, but how did the Greeks actually use mechanical devices? Well, not to worry, because they didn't just think about this stuff in the abstract. They actually created some incredibly fascinating real machines. The Greeks didn't just imagine mechanical beings like Talos in their myths. They actually started building real machines that were designed to function autonomously or with minimal human input. These early mechanical wonders were often powered by water, steam, or simple mechanical gears, and they served all kinds of purposes. Some were purely for entertainment, others for more practical uses, like timekeeping or defense. But it's interesting to note that while their technology wasn't on the level of modern robotics, the ideas were already in motion, just waiting for the right advancements to make them a reality. One of the most famous examples of early Greek automaton technology was the hero's engine, a simple but brilliant device created by the inventor Heron of Alexandria around the 1st century CE. This steam-powered device, often considered the precursor to the steam engine, worked by heating water to produce steam, which was then directed through pipes to create rotary motion. It wasn't exactly a robot, but it was an early demonstration of the potential for using steam to create automated movement. The device was more of a novelty, used in religious ceremonies or as a toy, but it hinted at a future where machines could move without direct human effort. Imagine a small, rotating sphere powered by steam. This was as close as they could get to the concept of self-propelling, autonomous machines. The concept of automated timekeeping was also explored, with the Greeks creating incredibly accurate water clocks. These devices used the flow of water to mark the passage of time, and in some cases, they even included moving parts, like figures that would strike bells or symbols at certain intervals. The innovation wasn't just in the idea of the machine, but in the realization that machines could be more than tools. They could carry out tasks, mark time, and interact with the world in ways that seemed almost alive. Historians still argue whether the Greeks ever truly believed in the possibility of autonomous robots in a modern sense, or whether they saw their creations as mere curiosities, limited to novelty and ritual. Many scholars think that while the Greeks were incredibly imaginative, their machines were more about demonstrating philosophical or engineering principles than about creating practical tools for everyday use. The Greeks were often focused on abstract concepts, ideas of motion, mechanics, and how the world worked. Their creations, though ahead of their time, were not the beginning of robotics as we know it today. They were rather the spark of a conversation about what machines could be and what they could do in ancient Greece. However, there was an undeniable curiosity about the possibility of imbuing lifelike qualities into machines. From the automaton statues that were supposed to serve the gods, to the various mechanical inventions that could carry out simple tasks, it's clear that the Greeks understood the potential for creating machines that were far beyond simple tools. They were flirting with the idea of machines that could think and act on their own. But the question that looms large, and one that the Greeks could never truly answer, is this: what would happen if these machines could think for themselves? Would they still be tools? Would they need to be controlled? Or could they be independent? These questions were already raised in the ancient world, even if their answers remained elusive. It wasn't just about automating tasks. It was about the relationship between man and machine, and whether that relationship could ever evolve into something more complex. And here's the kicker: the Greeks weren't alone in these musings. In fact, across the Mediterranean, from Egypt to Persia, engineers and thinkers were pondering similar questions about the future of machines. The concept of creating mechanical beings wasn't confined to the philosophers of Athens. There was a broader curiosity about what machines could be capable of. And while the Greeks didn't build the robots we think of today, they laid the groundwork for a centuries-long conversation about the potential for machines to be autonomous. So, as we think about the Greeks and their mechanical dreams, it's helpful to recognize that their ideas weren't rooted in the future as we know it now, but in the potential of their world and their understanding of mechanics. Their creations were awe-inspiring for their time, but they didn't cross the threshold into fully autonomous machines. Instead, they gave us something, perhaps even more powerful: the idea of machines that could one day operate without human hands, directly controlling them, moving forward in time, especially during the Renaissance. Thinkers would continue to revisit these Greek ideas. Archimedes' genius and the mythical Hephaestus would inspire engineers and artists in Europe to think of ways to build on what the Greeks had imagined. But for now, the Greek automaton was still a fascinating curiosity, a reflection of their ability to combine myth with the possibilities of engineering. Their legacy lived on in these small machines, these precursors to the robots we'd later create. But the real leap from the theoretical to the practical was still to come as we move beyond the world of myths and early mechanical creations. Let's explore another side of Greek thought that would inform the conversation on autonomous machines, the philosophical musings of the Greeks on life, intelligence, and purpose. The thinkers of ancient Greece didn't just build machines, they also debated what it would mean for a machine to have any kind of life or thought of its own. Would a machine that operates autonomously ever be considered alive? Could it ever have a mind of its own? Aristotle, for instance, had a very clear distinction between things that were living and things that were merely mechanical. To him, life was characterized by the ability to grow, reproduce, and adapt to changing environments. Machines, by their nature, could not exhibit these traits. However, his ideas about motion and causality still left room for the possibility of machines that moved on their own. Aristotle's work on mechanics laid some of the intellectual groundwork for later thinkers to consider how machines could act in a way that mimicked living things. But then we come to another question. If a machine could mimic life, move, act, respond, could it become something more than just a tool? In his work, The Politics, Aristotle also raised important questions about purpose and the essence of beings. These ideas would eventually inspire questions about machines and artificial intelligence. Can a machine ever have its own purpose, separate from that of its creator? And here's the truly intriguing part. The Greeks didn't just leave these ideas behind in their dusty scrolls. In fact, these philosophical musings about life, intelligence, and purpose continue to inform the debates we have about robots and artificial intelligence. Today, think about the Turing test, which tries to determine whether a machine can think like a human. Would Aristotle have seen this test as a pursuit of knowledge or as an attempt to push the boundaries of what machines could do? The Greek philosophers, with their questions about life and intelligence, gave us the intellectual tools to understand modern robotics. So, as you lie back and think about those first Greek ideas about machines like Talos, or Heron's steam-powered wonders, or the abstract musings of Aristotle, remember that they weren't just dreaming about machines. They were dreaming about a future where machines might not only mimic human work, but human qualities, too. The seeds they planted about intelligence, autonomy, and the nature of machines are still growing today. In our modern world of artificial intelligence and autonomous robots, now let's shift gears a bit and delve into the realm of Greek theater, where automation played a surprisingly significant role. While this might not immediately come to mind when you think of robots, the Greeks used automata in their performances, blending technology with drama in ways that hinted at the future of machines in entertainment. Imagine the bustling streets of ancient Athens, the echoes of theater-goers filling the air, and the grand amphitheaters where plays were held. These open-air spaces hosted some of the most elaborate theatrical productions of the ancient world, filled with gods, heroes, and epic narratives. But behind the scenes, technology was quietly enhancing these performances. The Greeks didn't just rely on actors to convey their stories. They brought in automated devices, machinery designed to create dramatic effects, make objects move on their own, and even simulate the gods' power. These devices were the precursors to what we might now think of as special effects, but they also represent a unique moment in the blending of human artistry with mechanical invention. One of the most famous examples is the use of machina, a mechanical device that allowed gods to appear in the sky, seemingly descending or ascending to and from the heavens. This was referred to as deus ex machina, which literally means God from the machine. The term is now synonymous with sudden, unexpected interventions in a story. But back in ancient Greece, it referred to a literal machine that allowed a god to appear on stage. This wasn't just a simple pulley or rope system. It was an elaborate mechanical setup that could lift actors or props high into the air, creating the illusion of divine intervention. For the Greeks, these automated systems weren't just a fun addition. They were a crucial part of telling a larger-than-life story that blurred the lines between the human and the divine. The use of these automata in theater wasn't just about impressing the audience. It was about conveying the unseen forces that the Greeks believed controlled the world. The gods were powerful, and the use of machines in this context symbolized the extent to which human creativity could mirror divine intervention. But at the same time, it posed a philosophical question. If machines can create these awe-inspiring effects, what does that say about the nature of control, agency, and power? Could a machine ever be seen as divine or as an extension of the gods themselves? Historians still debate the significance of this technological integration in ancient Greek theater. Was it a demonstration of innovation, or was it simply a means to enhance the emotional experience of the audience? Regardless, the Greeks were clearly interested in machines that could function autonomously to produce impressive, even supernatural results. This idea of machines operating independently of human intervention, though never fully realized in the form of robots, was already present in the cultural imagination. Now, imagine sitting in the audience at one of these plays, looking up as a god is lowered from the sky by a machine. The audience wouldn't have thought of it as a robot in the way we do today, but in a way, these mechanical gods were early examples of autonomous entities, machines acting on their own, serving a larger purpose without needing human control in the moment. They were created to perform a task autonomously, much like the robots of today do, albeit for a theatrical, not practical, function. This use of automation for dramatic effect shows that the ancient Greeks weren't just pondering machines that could work in factories or workshops. They were envisioning machines that could play a role in society, in culture, in entertainment. The idea that a machine could take on a life of its own, that it could interact with people and create meaning beyond its purely mechanical function, was already in the air, even if it was wrapped in myth and performance. The very concept of a machine moving independently, carrying out a task without human help, was part of the cultural and philosophical fabric of ancient Greece in the centuries that followed, particularly during the Renaissance. This fascination with automata and their role in storytelling and drama would continue. Renaissance inventors, artists, and engineers drew inspiration from the Greek automaton and the concept of machines functioning autonomously in a performance setting. The idea of machines performing without direct human interaction became a key part of the intellectual environment, even if it was still far removed from the practical applications we see today in robotics. So, the next time you watch a modern film with stunning special effects, or see a robot performing a task without human control, think back to those ancient Greek theaters. The seeds of today's autonomous technology were planted long ago in the creative minds of people who saw the potential for machines not just as tools, but as entities capable of taking action on their own. The Greeks might not have built the robots we see today, but they laid the philosophical and cultural groundwork for thinking about what machines could be and what role they could play in society. As we continue on this journey through Greek thought and mechanical marvels, let's pause for a moment and think about the ethics of machines in ancient Greece. While they didn't have robots or artificial intelligence the way we do, the Greeks were deeply concerned with the nature of life, agency, and control. It's easy to assume that the Greeks saw their automata as just tools, but they also grappled with deeper questions about whether a machine could ever possess qualities beyond being a mere object of utility. Take, for instance, Plato's musings about the soul, intelligence, and the essence of life. Plato was concerned with the fundamental differences between living beings and machines, particularly focusing on the idea that true life was connected to a soul. In his work, the Timaeus, Plato elaborates on the soul's connection to the physical body and how that distinction makes a living being different from anything mechanical. To Plato, a machine, no matter how lifelike or advanced, could never truly possess a soul or purpose in the way that humans or animals did. Machines were made for one thing to serve, and this thought was very much tied to his belief that the role of humans was to control and guide the world around them, especially through their use of tools. Yet, within the same philosophical tradition, Aristotle offered an intriguing contrast. While he agreed that the soul was what made living beings fundamentally different from machines, Aristotle was also fascinated by motion, causality, and mechanical processes. Aristotle's work on automaton machines included the concept of motion that didn't require human intervention. In fact, he proposed that machines could be set in motion and function independently, though not in a way that could be compared to true living beings. Aristotle believed that the human mind could harness the power of cause and effect to create machines that could carry out tasks, automating actions or motions that were once performed by humans. However, for Aristotle, even the most advanced machine would never achieve true autonomy or free will. The ideas of moral agency and independent decision-making would remain the exclusive domain of living creatures. This brings us to an interesting philosophical paradox. If the Greeks were already imagining machines that could move on their own, act independently, and even mimic life, did that mean they were also considering the moral and ethical consequences of these creations? Could machines, even if mechanical and void of a soul, ever make choices? Could they have desire, preferences, or purposes of their own? Historians still argue whether the Greeks had a notion of robot rights. Okay, maybe not exactly robot rights, but close enough. Whether they considered the implications of machines evolving beyond the role of tools. While their myths about automatons were filled with imagery of machines serving the gods and fulfilling specific tasks, the question of whether such machines could have autonomy, whether they could act beyond what they were created for, remains something of a speculative thought experiment. Would the Greeks have been terrified at the idea of machines acting on their own, or would they have been awestruck by the possibilities? One aspect of this question that intrigued many ancient thinkers was the relationship between creator and creation. Could the creator, in this case, a human inventor, ever lose control of their creation? Could a machine like Talos, created to serve and protect, eventually decide to act outside of the original purpose for which it was made? The myth of Talos gives us a bit of a clue. Talos was destroyed by the hero Jason and his Argonauts, not because the machine was a slave to its task, but because the creator had created something that could be manipulated and exploited. Talos, although powerful, was still bound to the wishes of the gods, and ultimately, it was human interference that led to its downfall. This raises the possibility that the Greeks thought about the dangers of creating machines that could act without human control. So, here we are, centuries later, and we're still grappling with many of the same ethical questions that the Greeks pondered so long ago. Can machines act autonomously? Should they have rights? Can we control them? These questions were there at the very beginning, long before the advent of artificial intelligence and modern robotics. But the Greeks weren't merely concerned with what machines could do. They also debated what role these machines should play in society and what moral responsibility humans should have in creating them. What's fascinating is that their debates about the moral implications of machines still resonate today. Take, for example, the Asimov's laws of robotics, which were written much later, but which reflect similar anxieties about the potential autonomy of machines. The laws are simple. Robots must not harm humans, must obey human orders, and must protect their own existence, but only if it doesn't conflict with the first two laws. These rules aren't all that different from some of the Greek thinkers' concerns. Could a machine once created, behave in a way that could be seen as moral or immoral? Should it be held responsible for its actions? If anything, what the Greeks did was lay the groundwork for a moral philosophy of machines, an area of thought that continues to this day. Automation has evolved from myth to reality, but the basic ethical questions raised by the Greeks remain as pertinent as ever. The Greeks helped us understand that machines are not just, quote, lifeless objects. They are creations that, depending on how we design and control them, could shape society in ways we haven't yet fully understood. From philosophy, let's now explore the world of actual mechanical inventions that emerged from Greek ingenuity. We've talked a lot about dreams and myths, but what did the Greeks really build? Was there ever a practical application of these early autonomous machines in everyday life? The short answer is yes. Though not robots as we know them today, the ancient Greeks were incredible inventors, and they created machines that were a step toward automation. Some of these creations were surprisingly complex, showing a clear understanding of engineering and mechanics. Take, for example, Heron of Alexandria, one of the greatest mechanical engineers of the ancient world. Heron designed and built machines that could move on their own, powered by water, steam, and air. One of his most famous invention was the aeolipile, often regarded as the first steam engine. Though it wasn't a practical tool for industrial use, it was more of a demonstration of principles. It was an early glimpse into the idea of harnessing energy to make machines move without direct human input. Heron's automaton-like creations were powered by simple forces such as air pressure and water. But the real genius behind these machines was that they could move without the constant intervention of humans. These were early forms of automation, and while they weren't exactly robots, they did set the stage for much of the thinking behind modern robotics. The fact that Heron's machines could move or perform tasks independently laid the groundwork for later inventions that would come centuries down the road. He was showing the world that mechanical life, even in the simplest forms, could become a reality. Historians still argue whether Heron's machines were just curiosities or a real exploration of how machines could function autonomously in practical ways. Was he simply entertaining his audience, or was he, in a way, asking the same questions we are today? Can machines truly function on their own, with a purpose beyond human control? While Heron may not have been attempting to create robots in the modern sense, his work points to the seeds of that possibility. And so, as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that the ideas about autonomous machines have deep roots in ancient thought, stretching from the divine myths of Hephaestus to the mechanical ingenuity of Heron. They may not have known it at the time, but the Greeks were imagining futures that are just now starting to come true. In some ways, they were the original dreamers of robots. As we continue our exploration of the Greeks and their fascination with machines, let's delve into the topic of human-like machines, a theme that was far more philosophical than technical, but had a lasting impact on how we think about artificial intelligence. Today, while the Greeks didn't build robots in the modern sense, their ideas about the line between the mechanical and the human were deeply philosophical. The idea of creating a machine that could think, feel, and perhaps even act like a human being was already stirring in the minds of thinkers like Aristotle and Plato. Both of these philosophers were intensely focused on what it meant to be human, but they also made room for the possibility of non-human creations mimicking human behavior. Plato, for example, famously explored the concept of forms, ideal versions of things that existed beyond the physical world. In this context, one could imagine that a machine might somehow come to resemble the form of a human being. The question was never purely mechanical for Plato. It was about the potential for machines to reflect something of the human soul or human purpose. Can a machine, even if it doesn't have a soul, ever behave like a human? Aristotle, while more grounded in the material world, also tackled issues related to the essence of life. He believed that everything had a purpose, or telos, which meant that humans, like all living beings, were inherently different from machines because of their ability to reason and achieve their purpose. But what about a machine that could do things independently, perform complex tasks, or even seem to have a will of its own? Would that machine still just be a tool, or would it, in some sense, be more Aristotle's musings about motion, causality, and potentiality were, in a way, a precursor to the debates we have today about AI and robots? The Greeks were asking questions about what makes something alive long before we could even imagine machines that could think for themselves. It's interesting to note that in some of the myths, the machines that the Greeks imagined weren't just tools. They were alive in some sense. Talos, for example, was a mechanical guardian that had a kind of lifelike power. He wasn't just a tool used by the gods. He was alive in the way that a tool doesn't quite capture. The Greeks imagined machines not only moving on their own, but with purpose and agency. Could a machine like Talos choose to act outside the bounds of its purpose? Could it ever have desires or feelings? The Greeks didn't answer these questions in a definitive way, but they opened the door to thinking about autonomy in machines. Historians still argue whether the Greeks were seriously contemplating the idea of human-like machines, or if these concepts were simply mythological fantasies. Some scholars believe that their stories were largely metaphysical, meant to explore the limits of human creativity and the divine. Others suggest that even their myths about machines, like Talos and Hephaestus's automata, were reflections of a deep-seated curiosity about what it means to be human, and whether machines could, in some way, be human too. Regardless of their intentions, the Greeks were already laying the philosophical groundwork for the age-old question that we still face today. Can machines ever be more than tools? But let's not forget the moral implications of this thinking. For the Greeks, creating life, whether through artifice or divine power, was a powerful act. The question of whether it was right to create beings, even mechanical ones, who could potentially have their own desires, was a major consideration. In fact, the myth of Pygmalion, who fell in love with a statue he created, brings up a troubling scenario. When you create something, what responsibilities do you take on? In the case of an autonomous machine, the question is, when you create something that could potentially make decisions on its own, do you have a moral obligation to that creation? Should a creator have control over their creation forever, or should the creation be free to evolve? The ethical implications of this question may seem like something of a modern concern, but the Greeks were already pondering it in their stories and their philosophy. The same questions that haunt us today about artificial intelligence, autonomy, and machine ethics were being asked in a different form thousands of years ago. Even in their mythology, the Greeks were considering the human-like qualities of their machines. They weren't just creating mechanical tools. They were imagining machines that could have some semblance of life. This ties back to their belief in the interconnectedness of all things, the idea that even a machine could have a form of existence or agency, even if it wasn't alive in the traditional sense. From these early ideas about human-like machines, the Greeks also pondered something else entirely: robots in the service of the gods. It's easy to think of robots as tools used by humans for practical purposes, but in the Greek imagination, these autonomous machines weren't always just made for work. Some of the greatest stories of automation come from the idea that machines could serve divine or supernatural purposes, performing tasks that were beyond the reach of mortals. Take the golden automaton servants crafted by Festus, the god of blacksmithing. These golden statues, unlike anything seen before, were made to serve the gods on Mount Olympus. These weren't just decorative objects. They were self-operating machines that could move, act, and carry out tasks for their creators. The idea of a machine serving divine purposes reveals a lot about the Greeks' imagination. They didn't see machines merely as servants to humans. They saw them as potential servants to the gods themselves. This idea is compelling for a couple of reasons. First, it shows how the Greeks thought of machines in relational terms as creations that could serve a higher purpose, not just in the mundane tasks of life, but in spiritual and divine realms. It's not just about machines being autonomous. It's about the purpose they served. A machine for a god would have been more than just a tool. It would have been a sacred creation, imbued with meaning and purpose beyond human needs. On the other hand, the question of whether these divine creations could turn against their creators or gain autonomy wasn't explored in the myths as much as it might have been, but we can still infer that the concern of loss of control was very much on the minds of the Greek philosophers and storytellers. If a machine could serve the gods, could it also rebel? Could it gain its own will, independent of its creator's instructions? The answer is murky in Greek thought, but the seeds of those fears about robot autonomy and rebellion, fears that plague us today, are certainly there. The notion that gods might need machines to serve them introduces another intriguing layer. If the divine can require tools or agents, does that make those tools more than just objects? Does their purpose elevate them to something that approaches the realm of the human? The Greeks, in their mythologies and inventions, were already pondering these philosophical and ethical questions. Questions that we continue to ask about AI and autonomous robots. As the centuries passed and the focus shifted from mythology to actual mechanical creations, the thoughts of the ancient Greeks on autonomy, life, and control would echo through time. The philosophers, engineers, and mythologists of ancient Greece were not just laying the groundwork for machines. They were laying the groundwork for an ethical framework that would later shape debates about robotics, artificial intelligence, and autonomy in modern times. As the Middle Ages unfolded, the resurgence of interest in Greek philosophy and innovation brought many of the ancient ideas back to the forefront of intellectual thought. The ideas of automatons and self-operating machines that had flourished in the ancient Greek world didn't just vanish. They were revived in the minds of medieval scholars and engineers who began to merge Greek concepts with new inventions, spurred by the intellectual revival of the Renaissance. However, during the medieval period, the perspective on machines took on a different tone. Many of the ancient Greek concepts about robots, automation, and the nature of machine life were seen through the lens of Christian theology and medieval worldviews. The Greeks had, of course, imagined machines serving gods, moving autonomously, and potentially living on their own. But medieval thinkers didn't quite share that same enthusiasm for divine servitude. Instead, they were more likely to view these ideas through the theological implications of human creativity, the divine order, and whether it was appropriate for humans to create machines that acted in ways that might challenge God's creation. It's important to note that during the medieval period, many of the Greek texts on mechanics and philosophy were translated into Latin and Arabic, leading to the spread of ideas about autonomous machines. Even if the medieval world wasn't yet technologically equipped to bring these visions to life, thinkers like Roger Bacon and Jean de la Motte drew upon ancient Greek and Roman texts and began imagining what machines might do if human hands were left to build them independently. But rather than thinking about robots in the same way the Greeks did, being autonomous, creations with purpose, medieval scholars saw machines more as tools to assist humanity. One thing to remember during this period is that the idea of artificial life was largely seen as heretical by many Christian thinkers. God's will was the ultimate force in the world, and the idea that humans could create machines that acted on their own, much less mimic human life was often met with suspicion. Machines, after all, were created to serve humanity, not to serve their own will or purpose. In medieval times, the very thought of creating lifelike machines might have seemed dangerous, as it was believed to challenge God's dominion over life itself. However, even with these theological concerns, medieval inventors weren't entirely averse to using mechanical devices to enhance their world. Some of the most famous medieval inventions, like water-powered mills, early clocks, and automaton-like figures used in church services, were inspired by the ideas of automation that had been popularized by the Greeks. Automaton-like devices, such as mechanical knights or clockwork angels that would move during church ceremonies, were employed in religious settings as tools to inspire awe, but they didn't stray too far into the realm of autonomous robots. Despite the religious caution surrounding them, these mechanical wonders still showcased the deep fascination with automation. Take, for example, water clocks that were used in the 12th and 13th centuries to regulate time, much like the Greeks had. These clocks often featured moving figures, such as angels or saints, which would strike bells or reveal hidden objects at certain times of the day. While these devices weren't autonomous in the modern sense, they were a step toward imagining machines that could function independently, following a set routine without human intervention. The concept of machines in this era wasn't to make tools for mundane labor, but to make time itself an object of worship, and perhaps even an entity in its own right. Medieval thinkers like Bacon were inspired by these Greek ideas about machines acting independently, but they also added their own twist, blending alchemy, mysticism, and early science. Bacon, for instance, suggested that it was possible for machines to take on more complex tasks beyond simple labor. But he was more concerned with their potential to enhance human knowledge and understanding of the natural world, rather than creating lifelike machines. However, despite these advances, medieval society wasn't ready for autonomous robots the way we might imagine today. The technological limitations and the religious constraints prevented such machines from becoming a reality. God's will was supreme, and creating beings with the agency to think, act, and move would have been seen as overstepping a divine boundary. These were machines for human service, not independent entities with their own purpose. The true leap toward modern robotics wouldn't come until much later, when technological innovations like steam engines and electricity started to make the dream of machines that could work autonomously seem possible. But the ideas about robots, created by the Greek philosophers and resurrected during the medieval era, did play an important role in shaping later scientific inquiry. Renaissance thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci were able to take these ancient ideas to new heights. Da Vinci, for example, sketched plans for an automated knight, a machine that could move on its own, and perhaps even resemble the human form in some ways. Though his machines were never built in his lifetime, they represented the growing interest in creating machines that could operate independently. A notion that had been incubating for centuries in the minds of Greek philosophers and medieval inventors. In essence, medieval Europe was caught between two worlds. One foot in the ancient Greek past, with its fascination with automation and divine machines, and one foot in the Christian present, which was chary of the consequences of humans creating lifelike machines. This tension between creativity and religious restraint would shape the trajectory of mechanical innovation for centuries to come. As the Renaissance unfolded, the ancient Greek fascination with mechanical marvels began to blossom anew with the resurgence of interest in Greek texts, especially those concerning mechanics, philosophy, and automata. The intellectual and artistic landscape was ripe for fresh ideas about autonomous machines. Renaissance thinkers, engineers, and artists, inspired by the writings of Aristotle, Archimedes, and others, began to breathe new life into ancient concepts, pushing forward the idea of machines that could act on their own. The concept of automation had returned, but this time there was a clearer focus on practicality and design ideas that would set the stage for the modern understanding of robotics. One of the most significant figures of this time was Leonardo da Vinci, whose sketches for automaton-like machines were groundbreaking. Da Vinci, a man whose genius spanned art, engineering, and science, became one of the first to seriously sketch plans for machines that mimicked human-like movements. His famous design for an automated knight is one of the most well-known examples. This mechanical suit, designed to sit upright and move its arms and head, was clearly a precursor to modern humanoid robots, though it was never built in his time. Da Vinci's design demonstrated that the dream of autonomous machines wasn't just a mythological or philosophical exercise. It was now a real possibility in the minds of inventors and engineers. What's fascinating is how Da Vinci's designs incorporated many of the principles that the Greeks had imagined centuries earlier. The knight wasn't powered by magic, but by mechanical gears, pulleys, and levers. An early glimpse into the concept of kinetic movement, driven by mechanical forces. Leonardo's work was not just about automaton toys or entertainment. He was pondering how such a machine could be used practically, possibly in warfare, or even as a demonstration of human ingenuity. While Leonardo's mechanical knight didn't actually come to life during his lifetime, it symbolized a fundamental shift in how people thought about machines. What had once been relegated to myth and philosophy machines that could move and act autonomously was now on the brink of becoming a physical reality. Leonardo, with his incredible knowledge of anatomy, movement, and mechanics, understood that human motion could be replicated using mechanical systems. This understanding set the foundation for the creation of machines that didn't simply follow a set of commands, but could mimic human behavior, suggesting that the concept of human-like machines was now something engineers were beginning to consider as a viable goal. Leonardo wasn't alone in his interest in autonomous machines. During the Renaissance, there was a wider cultural fascination with not just mechanical automatons, but with machines that could somehow replicate human qualities, movement, thought, decision-making. The interest in these mechanical creations wasn't just about functionality. It was about achieving a certain human quality in the design. As artists and engineers turned to the Greeks for inspiration, they began to explore how the ancient concepts of automatons could be reinterpreted in a more technologically feasible way. This period also witnessed the rise of early robots in mechanical displays. Automata began to appear in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, particularly in the courts of wealthy monarchs. Clockwork dolls, self-operating animals, and mechanical musicians were created as entertainment and to showcase the skill of the inventors. These devices, though far simpler than what we think of as robots today, were still powered by a combination of gears, springs, and weights. They were early demonstrations of autonomous motion, meant to awe and entertain, but they also represented a growing fascination with the idea that machines could move on their own, independently of human effort. Historians still debate whether Renaissance inventors, like Leonardo, were more interested in the aesthetic and artistic possibilities of automation, or whether they were genuinely imagining a future where machines would become more than just tools. It's likely that, much like their Greek predecessors, Renaissance thinkers were exploring both the technical and philosophical possibilities of autonomous machines. They were bridging the gap between mythology and reality, giving birth to the idea that machines could one day perform tasks, carry out operations, and even mimic human movement in ways that the ancient Greeks could only dream of. But it's also important to understand that the machines they created were still far from the sophisticated robots of today. The cogs and wheels of Renaissance automata were impressive feats of engineering, but they were still limited by the technology of the time. The true leap to modern robotics wouldn't come until the Industrial Revolution and beyond, when the advent of electricity, computers, and artificial intelligence allowed for the creation of machines that could not only move, but think, learn, and adapt. Even so, the Renaissance's approach to mechanical design and the reimagining of ancient Greek ideas laid the intellectual foundation for this modern wave of technology. The Renaissance's fascination with autonomous machines also marks a shift in how humans viewed their relationship with technology. In the medieval era, machines were seen as tools, servants of humanity's will. But in the Renaissance, the discussion began to shift toward a more complicated relationship, one that considered the purpose of machines beyond mere function. Would these machines just serve humanity, or could they one day have a life of their own? Could they evolve past being tools and become something else, agents in their own right? The Renaissance was a time of rebirth, not just of classical texts and knowledge, but of ideas about creation and purpose. The Greeks had already laid the groundwork, But it took the Renaissance thinkers to push the boundaries of what was possible. And it wasn't just about creating better tools. It was about creating new forms of life in machines. Though the machines of this period were far from sentient, the idea that a machine could one day think, move, and act autonomously was firmly planted in the minds of inventors and philosophers alike as we move into the Industrial Revolution and beyond. The theoretical concepts that the Greeks, Renaissance thinkers, and medieval scholars speculated about machines finally began to gain real-world traction. The dream of autonomous machines, ones that could move on their own, think independently, and serve humanity in a variety of ways, was closer than ever. The technological advancements of the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly in fields like mechanical engineering, electricity, and computing, started to transform what had once been myth into reality. During the Industrial Revolution, we saw the first real examples of machines performing work autonomously. Steam engines, powered factories, and machines began to operate without human effort, except for the initial setup. But these machines, while revolutionary, were still far from what we might consider autonomous robots. They could do specific tasks like pumping water or spinning thread, but they were still limited by their programming and the need for human oversight. Nonetheless, they signaled the beginning of an era in which humans could rely on machines to do more and more of the labor that was once exclusively their domain. It wasn't until the early 20th century that the world saw more concrete advancements toward robots that could not only perform tasks, but also learn and interact with their environment. The idea of a machine that could function independently, think for itself, and act autonomously was finally moving from the pages of science fiction into reality. This was the age of the first industrial robots designed to help with factory work. However, these robots were still in their infancy, operating under rigid programming and requiring careful calibration by human operators. But there was a key shift that happened in the mid-20th century: artificial intelligence. With the rise of computers and the development of algorithms, researchers began to explore the idea of machines that could not only perform tasks, but also learn from their environment and make decisions on their own. This was a massive leap from the mechanical devices the Greeks had imagined. Now, we were creating machines that didn't just perform a single task repeatedly. They could adapt, analyze, and even solve problems. The dream of the autonomous machine was becoming increasingly plausible. It's fascinating to think that as we march toward the age of autonomous vehicles, robots in our homes, and artificial intelligence, the questions that the Greeks first raised in their myths and philosophical debates are still as relevant as ever. Should we create robots that can make their own decisions? Should we give them rights or responsibilities? And if a machine has the ability to make decisions, should it be held accountable for those decisions? In fact, robot ethics, the study of how robots should interact with humans, and what responsibilities they have to society has become a major field of study. Much like the ethical dilemmas Aristotle and Plato pondered about machines in their time, we are now facing the same questions. Should robots simply be tools, or should they be regarded as something more? If they can think and act independently, do they deserve moral consideration, or are they just sophisticated tools? As we approach the possibility of artificial general intelligence machines that can think and learn as well as humans, the issues that the Greeks brought up about autonomy, purpose, and control become even more pressing. The potential for machines to one day exceed human intelligence isn't just the stuff of sci-fi. It's a very real possibility that could transform every aspect of human life. Will these machines continue to serve us as tools, or could they evolve into something entirely different? Could they have their own sense of purpose and desire? And if they do, what responsibility do we, as their creators, have toward them? Historians and ethicists still argue whether we are truly ready for self-aware machines, and whether we are asking the right questions about what these creations should be capable of. As robots become more integrated into our daily lives, the line between what makes something human and what makes something a machine continues to blur. In a way, the Greeks were asking questions that we are still grappling with today. Questions about the relationship between humans and their creations, about whether machines can possess agency, and about whether they can define their own purpose. As the technology continues to advance, we find ourselves at a crossroads similar to the one the Greeks faced. What role should machines play in our world? The ancient Greeks were among the first to imagine machines that could think, move, and even serve in ways that mimicked life. Their ideas about autonomy and ethics continue to shape the way we think about robots and artificial intelligence today. What started as myths and philosophical speculation has evolved into a field of scientific inquiry and innovation that challenges our understanding of life, intelligence, and what it means to create. Now, let's shift our gaze toward modern robotics, where the ancient Greek legacy in thinking about autonomous machines has found its real-world counterpart. We've gone from myths about gods creating self-moving statues to advanced robots performing complex tasks in factories, hospitals, and even in our homes. It's incredible to see how far we've come. But it's also fascinating to think about the continuity of ideas from those first Greek philosophers to the cutting-edge machines we're creating today. But before we dive into the state of modern robotics, it's worth reflecting on just how much the foundational thoughts of the Greeks about autonomy, creation, and purpose have endured. We're at the cusp of a robot revolution that's already transforming industries and societies around the world. Robots are no longer limited to factories. They're in healthcare, space exploration, logistics, and even the arts. The idea of autonomous robots has shifted from the realm of philosophical curiosity to a technological necessity. And the Greeks with their intricate blend of mythology and mechanical thinking, were the first to plant the seeds for this future. However, as we continue to create intelligent machines capable of working without human input, the age-old questions raised by the Greeks about agency, control, and ethics remain as important as ever. Will machines become our partners in work and creativity, or will they challenge us in ways we can't anticipate? The Greeks imagined the future of machines with a sense of awe, and today, as we build robots that move, think, and learn, we're beginning to realize that this is only the beginning of what's possible. In the end, the ancient Greeks didn't just build myths. They built a philosophical foundation that still informs how we approach technology today. As we build machines that can do everything from cleaning our homes to performing surgeries, we must ask ourselves, what role should robots play in our world, and who should be in charge? Just as the Greeks once pondered the power of their gods and creations, we are now left to reflect on the creations we have made and the power they may one day hold. As we stand at the precipice of a new technological age, it's crucial to reflect on the ethical implications of autonomous machines. The ancient Greeks may not have had robots in the sense we understand them today, but their ideas about autonomy, responsibility, and creation laid the groundwork for our modern conversations about artificial intelligence and robot ethics. Just as they questioned the power of gods and the potential of human creations, we now must grapple with our creation's machines that think, learn, and act independently. The ethical challenges we face today are not just about who owns a robot or how robots interact with humans. They also include fundamental questions about consciousness, free will, and moral agency. Can a machine be considered alive if robots can make decisions independently? Should they be held responsible for their actions? Should they have rights or obligations, or are they simply tools? These are questions that, in many ways, echo the ancient Greek debates about the relationship between man and machine. One of the most prominent discussions in modern robotics revolves around machine learning, the ability for machines to learn from experience, adapt, and make decisions without explicit programming. This technology has opened up vast possibilities for what machines can do, but it also introduces a new set of ethical concerns. When a robot learns to adapt its behavior, it begins to blur the lines between a tool and a decision maker. If a robot can make decisions, what happens if it makes a mistake or performs an action that harms a human? Can we hold the robot accountable, or is the fault the creator's? These are the kinds of questions that ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Plato would have pondered had they lived in an age where machines could think for themselves. The famous thought experiment of the Turing test, proposed by Alan Turing in 1950, echoes the concerns of ancient philosophers. What makes something human? If a machine can think, reason, and interact indistinguishably from a human, does it have rights or personhood? The test measures a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior, equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. However, just as the Greeks questioned the nature of life and purpose in their own creations, we now ask, what does it mean for a machine to be truly conscious, or to have its own moral compass? Modern artificial intelligence and robotics have made great strides in mimicking human thought, but they've also raised fundamental ethical questions that remain largely unanswered. For instance, self-driving cars have sparked debates over moral decisions. If a car's AI must choose between swerving to avoid hitting a pedestrian, but risking the lives of its passengers, or staying the course and hitting the pedestrian, who makes that choice? The machine or its creators? Is the robot held accountable for its actions, or is it merely following its programming? These questions are a direct continuation of the kinds of moral and ethical concerns that the Greeks raised when thinking about the autonomy of their divine machines and automata, the potential for machines to become autonomous. Thinking, learning beings raises even larger philosophical debates. Will robots one day be capable of experiencing emotions, desires, or even suffering as robots gain more decision-making power? These questions become more urgent, just as the ancient Greeks wondered if a machine could have a soul or act outside its creator's control. We now wonder if machines could one day surpass their creators in intelligence and autonomy. What happens when these machines no longer need us to operate, guide, or program them? But it's not just about the machines themselves. We, as human creators, are confronted with questions about control. How much power do we want to give machines? And if machines can think, learn, and make decisions, what happens to the balance of power? It's not unlike the ancient stories of gods and creators. When you create something with immense power, you must also be prepared for the consequences of that creation. The ancient Greeks explored this dynamic with their stories of creators who lost control of their creations. The modern version of that story involves us building autonomous systems and then facing the uncertain consequences of their actions. This ethical debate about robots and AI often centers around autonomy and agency. If machines are designed to make their own decisions, should we impose limitations on them? Or should we let them grow, adapt, and function freely? This is a direct parallel to the ancient Greek myths of Talos, the mechanical giant, and the golden automata of Hephaestus, who were creations that served a purpose, but were also capable of independent action. The Greeks may not have anticipated the technical realities of AI and robotics, but they certainly understood the ethical implications of creating beings that could move, act, and think autonomously. Looking ahead, we are beginning to see the emergence of robots with rights in some legal and ethical frameworks. For example, the EU has considered creating a legal category for robots, establishing rules for their interaction with humans and their potential liabilities. Some believe robots may one day be given the same rights as animals, or even humans. If robots are to live and work alongside us, should they be granted legal protections, or are they simply property to be controlled? Again, these ideas harken back to ancient philosophical questions about autonomy, responsibility, and the potential consciousness of machines. In the end, what we've seen from the Greeks, from their myths to their early machines, was a profound philosophical exploration of what it means to create and control autonomous beings. The Greeks may not have had the technology to build robots, but they laid the intellectual groundwork that continues to inform our thinking about machines and artificial intelligence today. As we move forward into a world where robots can think, learn, and even make moral decisions, we are faced with many of the same questions that the Greeks pondered thousands of years ago. What is the relationship between creator and creation? What happens when machines can act independently? And what responsibilities do we have toward them? Can machines ever be more than tools? These are questions that continue to evolve as our technology advances. But no matter how sophisticated our machines become, the ancient Greeks will remain an important part of this conversation. They were the first to imagine a world where machines could live, move, and think autonomously. And as we build our own robots, we find ourselves once again asking the same questions. What does it mean to create life? What does it mean to give a machine autonomy? In this way, the Greek legacy lives on, shaping not just our technology, but our understanding of what it means to be human, and what it means to create a machine that could one day be just like us. As we wind down tonight's journey, remember that the Greeks, with their mythic visions and mechanical wonders, were the first to plant the seeds of a future where machines could act on their own. And now, as we stand on the brink of realizing those dreams, we are left to contemplate not just the possibilities of technology, but the responsibilities of creating and interacting with autonomous beings. The future of robotics and artificial intelligence may be unknown, but it's clear that the Greeks were thinking about it long before we were. And in a way, their ancient thoughts on automation, life, and control are just as relevant today as they ever were. It seems we've come to the end of our journey, exploring the deep, fascinating world of ancient Greek philosophy and its influence on modern robotics and artificial intelligence. We've traced the roots of automation from the mythical automata of Hephaestus to the brilliant mechanical designs of Leonardo da Vinci, and from there, how these ideas evolved into the technologies we now face today. The same questions the Greeks pondered about the nature of autonomy, control, and ethics still echo in our modern conversations about AI and robot rights. Their myths, like the tale of Talos, and their philosophical musings, such as those of Aristotle and Plato, have continued to shape the way we think about the creation of machines that could act on their own, perform tasks, and possibly even gain autonomy. They laid the intellectual groundwork for a conversation that would continue for centuries, and now finds itself at the forefront of technological debates in the 21st century. As we look forward, the future of robotics and AI is just beginning to unfold. We are standing on the precipice of a new age, one in which robots and artificial intelligence may soon be capable of doing tasks we never thought possible. Machines that can learn, adapt, and perhaps even make decisions that are seemingly independent of human oversight. But as we move toward this future, we must consider the same ethical dilemmas and philosophical questions the Greeks posed so long ago. What is the role of the creator? How do we balance autonomy with control? What moral responsibilities do we have towards our creations? So, as we lie here, reflecting on the questions that still challenge us today, we can appreciate the fact that while technology may have evolved, many of the core ethical and philosophical questions about machines, autonomy, and intelligence have remained surprisingly constant through time. Just like the Greeks did, we now must navigate this complex landscape, exploring the boundaries of human innovation and machine capabilities. And just as the ancient Greek thinkers imagined, our modern world is one where machines can change how we live, work, and even think. The next time you find yourself encountering robots, whether they are helping in a factory or offering services in a hospital, take a moment to reflect on the questions that have been asked for millennia and how we continue to build upon those ancient dreams, asking new questions of our own. Now, as you settle in, feel the weight of the day slip away, the cool breeze from the night filling the room. And remember that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, the philosophical journey started long ago in the minds of thinkers, creators, and dreamers who first imagined a world where machines could move, think, and act independently. And that, my friends, is the legacy that shapes the world of autonomous robots we're heading toward. Sweet dreams, and may your thoughts of ancient automata and modern robots blend together as you drift into a peaceful sleep where your own creativity can roam freely, just as the ancient Greeks once imagined.